Welcome to This Explainer. Look, if you or someone you love is trying to navigate the housing system with a disability, you already know it feels like a giant, frustrating maze. Today, we're cutting through all that red tape. We're going to take those dense, bureaucratic housing policies and translate them into a totally empowering, actionable toolkit so you can actually find a home that's both accessible and affordable. Let's get right into it. First things first, what actually counts as a disability when we talk about housing? It's a huge question, right? It literally dictates everything from your legal rights to the exact funding you can get. And honestly, the answer is probably a lot broader than you might think. So to untangle this whole web, we're going to break this explainer down into four main parts. We'll cover your fair housing rights, navigating vouchers and subsidies, funding accessible home modifications, and finally, community living and support. Starting off with part one, your fair housing rates. Okay, so under the Fair Housing Act, the legal definition of a disability is incredibly broad. Sure, it covers things you'd expect, like mobility and visual impairments or mental and emotional illnesses. But did you know it also protects people living with HIV or AIDS? Or even folks who are just perceived as having an impairment, or those who have successfully completed an addiction recovery program? Basically, your legal shield here covers a really vast array of life circumstances. And knowing exactly what landlords are not allowed to do is absolutely crucial for spotting discrimination. These are major red flags. A landlord cannot, under any circumstances, charge you double the security deposit just because you use a wheelchair or a scooter. No way. They can't ignore your need for an emotional support animal just because they have a blanket no pets policy. And they definitely can't force you into a ground floor unit or demand that you be capable of quote-unquote independent living just to rent an apartment. Now, besides stopping the bad stuff, you also have an affirmative right to request reasonable accommodations. And here's a super practical tip straight from the policies. If your disability is obvious, say you're visually impaired and use a guide dog, and your need for an accommodation is also obvious, housing providers cannot legally demand your medical records. They can't force you to jump through unnecessary medical hoops just to grant those basic necessary changes. Moving right along to part two, navigating vouchers and subsidies. You really need to know the difference between the two main types of subsidized housing. Project-based means the housing authority literally owns the building. You have to live in their specific complex to get the subsidy. Tenant-based, on the other hand, is a voucher system. You find an independent private landlord who accepts the voucher. And the absolute best part? That subsidy travels with you if you decide to move. It gives you so much more freedom. Now, one of the biggest programs out there specifically for non-elderly people with disabilities is Section 811. But here's the catch. To qualify, you can't just be considered low income. You have to be extremely low income. What does that actually mean? It means your household income has to be at or below 30% of your area median income. Depending on where you live, that often means earning roughly $10,000 to $20,000 a year. And listen, getting a Section 811 voucher isn't as simple as walking into an office and filling out a form. You kind of have to know how to play the game. First, you've got to be enrolled in Medicare or Medicaid. Second, you have to establish an active record with your local county or state social services, like mental health or disability services. Once you have those two pillars set up, your social worker can actually issue a backdoor referral directly to the housing authority on your behalf. Section 811 is great, but there are other options too, like Mainstream and NED, which stands for Non-Elderly Disabled Vouchers. There's a really distinct difference in who is eligible for these. For a Mainstream voucher, the eligible disabled member can be literally anyone in the household. But for a NED voucher, the disabled member has to be the head of the household, a co-head, or a spouse. Knowing exactly which one fits your family situation will save you a ton of time. All right, let's jump to part three, funding accessible home modifications. Let's start with a really staggering number. $121,812. That is the maximum grant available from the VA Specially Adapted Housing Grant for service-disabled veterans. If you're a qualifying wheelchair user and you acquired your disability while serving our country, the VA will pay up to that amount to help you buy, build, or totally remodel a permanent home. That is an absolute game changer. But what if you aren't a veteran? Well, there is still a lot of grant money out there. And remember, grants are essentially free money you don't ever have to pay back. Need a ramp so you can get out the door to work? Your state vocational rehabilitation agency might cover it. Over 62 and low income? Check out USDA grants. Medicaid waivers can also fund modifications. And even the Department of Energy might step in to upgrade your heating or replace drafty windows. Just keep in mind, the rules change heavily from state to state, so you'll definitely want to start local. Now, if grants aren't cutting it, you might think about crowdfunding, but be incredibly careful here. Using the wrong platform can literally sabotage your benefits. If you use a for-profit site like GoFundMe, that cash drops straight into your personal bank account. That sudden spike in your personal assets can knock you right off your hard-earned Medicaid benefits. Boom, gone. Instead, you want to look at a nonprofit platform like Help Hope Live. They hold the funds on their end and pay your medical or housing bills directly, which legally protects your asset-based government assistance. And beyond just cash, there are amazing nationwide nonprofits out there that provide the actual physical muscle and materials to fix up your home. Programs like Rebuilding Together will come out and widen your doorways or put in grab bars totally free of charge. Or if you're looking at a new build, Habitat for Humanity lets low-income buyers put in 300 to 500 hours of sweat equity instead of a huge cash down payment. You end up with an incredible 0% interest mortgage. Finally, we've arrived at part 4, community living and support. If you remember literally nothing else from this explainer, remember this. Centers for Independent Living, or CILs. These are local community hubs run by people with disabilities for people with disabilities. They are an absolute goldmine. Whether you need help securing an apartment, getting a referral for a wheelchair van, or you just want some peer support from someone who actually gets what you're going through, your local CIL should be your very first phone call. Another massive piece of the independent living puzzle is HCBS, Home and Community-Based Services. Over the last 20 years, Medicaid has completely shifted its strategy. Instead of funneling money into putting people in nursing homes, they're pouring it into these HCBS waivers. This means you can get vital help with things like bathing, eating, or getting out of bed right in the comfort of your own home and your own neighborhood. And this whole shift toward home-based care actually has a really powerful legal backbone. The landmark Olmstead decision. The United States Supreme Court basically said, look, the unjustified segregation of people with disabilities is discrimination under the ADA, period. You have a fundamental legal right to get your care in the most integrated, community-based setting possible. So as we wrap up this explainer, yes, the housing bureaucracy is huge. And yeah, it often feels like it was designed just to be confusing. But you aren't wandering in the dark anymore. You know your fair housing rights. You know the exact steps to get that Section 811 referral. You know how to crowdfund without losing your Medicaid. And you know exactly where to find your local CIL. You've got the actionable tools to advocate for yourself. So the only question left is, which of these tools are you going to use first to secure your place in the community?